Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for your love for us, your willingness to reveal um, the future to us, Lord, even if it's in a shaded capacity, so we can't see everything. But you've given us the glimpses into the future that you want us to have, Lord. It's enough to realize that you're a God of love and a God of justice, and we appreciate everything you've done for us, Lord. And we just ask tonight for your wisdom as we look into your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right, Framing the Future, Session 8, Revelation chapter 11. Okay, so, I always changed my slide presentation, and then when I could get in here, it always changed back. Um, so a recap from last week is Matt took us through Revelation chapter 10, and we looked at this angel that came down and declared that, so we'll look at the passage in Revelation chapter 10, verse 5 through 7. And the angel who I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what is in it, the earth and what is in it, and the sea and what is in it, that there would be no more delay, but that in the days of the trumpet call to be sounded by the seventh angel, in other words, what we would call the sounding of the seventh trumpet, the mystery of God would be fulfilled, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. And so Matt explained his theory on what this was last week, and as we've been saying all along, that I don't believe anybody on this planet has it completely figured out. So when I present alternate theories to Matt's, it's not to communicate anything other than God's given us different insights into things, and so likely somewhere between the two of us is the truth. But although if given enough time, I'd love to teach the book of Revelation from the point of view where I share every point of view and then talk through the implications of that. Unfortunately, with the time constraints we have on this series, having to fit it into the session that we have on Wednesday nights, at the end of the day, I have so much I want to say about my particular point of view that it just doesn't always make a lot of sense to express other points of view as well, even in the sense of fairness. So I say at the head of time, most of what I say tonight is going to be prefaced with in my opinion, and you guys realize that that's a lot of what's the way you have to teach Revelation because of the way God's chosen to reveal things. But having said that, in my opinion, where we are in the book of Revelations is we've gone through the seven seal judgments, we've passed the midpoint of the tribulation and looked at the first six trumpet judgments, and we are getting to the point, and I believe that when we cover that Revelation chapter 10, I believe that was occurring at the after the sixth trumpet judgment. So we reached the sixth trumpet judgments in Revelation chapter 9. We took a change of scenery, but I don't believe a change of time. So I believe that we went from looking at the stuff that was going on earth to looking at the scene from a heavenly perspective for a minute. And Revelation chapter 10 was still in this period of time. My point, you can all see where I'm doing at. I believe that we're right about here in our chronology, where we're getting close to the second coming, and we're getting close to the seven bowl judgments, which we'll look at in Revelation 15 and 16. But we're sort of here, and so I believe Revelation chapter 10 was from that point of view, and when it talks about the days of the seventh trumpet, the mystery of God being revealed, I believe that means that the plan of God's salvation for the human race is going to be wrapped up, and so it's going to be wrapped up in this dispensation. So obviously, when we get to the millennial time frame, we will talk about that some more. But how I see this happening is this is still happening within the timeline of the seven trumpets. And so now when we go into Revelation chapter 11, we're going to take another break but this time we're going to move around in the timeline a little bit. So God's allowed us to progress through some judgments, and then, but other things are going on at the same time. So when we start to study Revelation chapter 11, we're going to back up to the midpoint of the tribulation, and we're going to talk about something that's going to happen there. And then in chapter 12, I think we're going to back up to the midpoint of the tribulation and talk about some things. Then Revelation chapter 13 will be the same. We're going to back up to the midpoint, and each one of them is a different topic, but the starting point for all of these things is the midpoint of the tribulation and has to do with this half of the tribulation. Then 14 is a very unusual chapter, and we'll talk about it more when we get there. And then 15 and 16 get back on the chronology, and then it's pretty much, 17 and 18. So I'm giving you all of this. I'm sorry ahead of time. Is talking about a very specific subject. So we will once again back up to the some point in the timeline. I'm not quite sure yet. And then from that point forward, 19 forward, it's all on the same timeline. So it's a little confusing, but I want you to keep track of where we are on the timeline, because I think one of the most confusing things about the book of Revelation is sort of keeping track of when things happen. And I think from this point forward, everything happens in the second part of the tribulation, what Jesus called the Great Tribulation. So with that in mind, let's move on to Revelation chapter 11 and look at what's happening here. So the first thing we're going to look at is the third temple, the third Jewish temple. And we're going to see what that looks like. So in Revelation 11, chapter 11, verse 1 and 2, then I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there. But do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, for it is given over to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. So keep in mind, 42 months is 3.5 years. And so here's a picture of the Jewish temple. It's obviously not a picture of the actual temple, but it's an artist rendering. So the temples, if I had a lot of time, we'd really go into this a little deep. It's interesting. I just want to point out that a couple of the people that I follow to get information from, at least 2 of them broke the chapter 11 of Revelation into 4 different parts. And so the fact that I'm being asked to teach it in one part it means that I need to not go into as much detail as they went into. So I won't go into a lot of detail about the temples, but you should know this, that everybody knows about the first temple, which was the temple that King Solomon built and just poured all kinds of wealth into it. And it was ultimately destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, the leader of Babylon, when he came and took over the nation of Israel and destroyed it, the nation of Judah, quite honestly. And then, so that was the end of the first temple. Then and I'm going to, roughly 100 years later, obviously, give or take, the second temple was built. That was built under Zerubbabel and
Cyrus.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was looking for Ezra, but he was more the priest of it. Yeah, but several of the Old Testament chapters talk about how King Cyrus of Persia allowed the Jewish people to go back and build the temple.
There was 70 years that they were in exile.
Right.
And then there was another 49 years that it took to establish the temple. So Zerubbabel actually died before the temple was fully restored and dedicated when they were rebuilding. And a lot of people think that Daniel's 7 weeks of 7, and then it goes into 62 weeks.
Right.
The 7 weeks of 7 were to rebuild the temple, to start out the vision that God gave Daniel at the time. Because remember, Daniel was living during the exile period of the Babylonians conquering the first, destroying the first temple. And so the vision was like, well, how long is it going to take to get reestablished? And so Don's right, about 100. You could say 70 plus 49 and kind of figure out maybe the exact, but that's kind of how it went.
The important thing to note, and so this is the content that I would love to teach through, honestly, but we don't have a lot of time tonight. The important part is the second temple was built sometime after the nation of Judah was allowed to return, and that temple was enhanced by King Herod. It's often called Herod's temple because he poured a lot of wealth into the temple in an effort to appease the Jewish people, and it didn't work. They still hated him. But that temple was destroyed, obviously, in 70 AD when the nation of Israel was destroyed again. And the third temple is going to be built. The Bible tells us in several places that it will exist during the tribulation time period. And so this is what we're talking about here is the third temple. And then we also have been told that this temple is only going to last, it's not going to last long because it's eventually going to be destroyed. And then God's going to build a fourth temple. And Jesus is actually going to at least be in charge of the construction, whether he actually does it or allows his servants, which would be us, to do it for him. It's something I'm very interested in seeing. But what we do know from Ezekiel chapters 40 through 49 is that the millennial kingdom will also have a temple. But in the case of what we're talking about here, we're talking about the third temple that's going to be built sometime in the near future because it's going to be in place at the midpoint of the tribulation. We've been talking a lot about the abomination of desolation, and the temple needs to be built so that event can take place. And so it could literally happen at any time. We could still be here when it happens. Obviously, in Matt's viewpoint, we're not only going to be here, but we're going to actually live to the point where the Antichrist goes in and desecrates the temple.
And I'd say keep in mind that you guys remember the marker to start the 7-year, the final week of Daniel, is the signing of the covenant that this Antichrist figure makes
Daniel chapter 9.
With many, right? And at the midpoint of that, that's when the abomination of desolation takes place, which has to happen in the temple.
Right.
The other thing that's interesting about this passage that Don's reading is John is measuring a temple, even though the temple in John's day was destroyed.
Yeah.
So he's now realizing that there's a temple restored in this vision that he's having, and that it's a key component to what's happening in these events that are being fulfilled in the prophecy.
To build on what Matt just said, Daniel was given a vision of a future temple, yet his temple in his day had been destroyed. And so he was seeing the temple rebuilt. And then John is seeing his temple of his day destroyed, and he's going to see it rebuilt. So it's interesting how God has repeated himself through the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation in that aspect. The important thing I wanted to point out, or the other thing I wanted to point out here is it says in verse 2, but do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, for it is given over to the nations, and nations in some translations is translated Gentiles. So, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. And so the outer court here this is called the Gentile area. Court of Gentiles. And then there's a court of women here, and then the court of men is here, and then the priests are the only ones who actually get to go inside those doors. So there's various areas, but when John was told not to measure the area of the Gentiles, that's what he was talking about here. Now the interesting thing is he was told to measure it, but the measurements were not recorded in Revelation. So the question is, why was he told to measure it if there was no purpose for that measurement? So a lot of people speculate that the measurement, even though he was given a rod to measure it, that the measurement was actually one more of a spiritual sense than one of a measurement sense. And so there's not a lot of clarifications here.
And it's possible, I've read too, that he is alluding to the fact that the temple exists and is also what we're about to discover, kind of a key central location to where we see these figures that we're about to look at minister or appear. That's kind of where they're at, is associated with the temple.
Right. Sean?
Is it possible that it's something referring to like giving hope to the Israelites that the temple will be rebuilt? Like they're going to be reading, or the people of God are going to be reading this, and they're going to be like, oh, why is he measuring the temple? The temple was destroyed.
Yeah.
It's going to be
Yeah, I think that's part of it this is the first time in Revelation that the temple has been mentioned. So we've been talking about the abomination of desolation before that. So we have that context already coming into this class. But actually in the book of Revelation, this is the first time that the temple is mentioned. Dennis.
And also the measurement.
Sorry.
When the first temple was built, God gave dimensions and instructions for to match the temple that is in heaven.
Right.
So could the measurements that John's taken with the staff be the temple that's in heaven?
No, I don't believe so. No, I believe that this is specifically to point out this earthly temple, and we'll look at why in a minute.
And that's what I was going to say. Perhaps this is indicating there will be a physical temple.
Yes, I believe that that's the true purpose of these two verses, to point out that a temple will again exist. And when we get back into Revelation chapter 13, that will become important because we will actually see more events that happen here. The important thing about chapter 2 that I want to point out is that what this means, that the Gentiles are going to, or the nations are going to trample on the holy city for 42 months. We're going to see this when we get into Revelation chapter 13. But at the midpoint of the tribulation, the temple and actually Jerusalem and Israel is sort of overtaken, and the Jewish people are, and we'll see even as soon as when Matt teaches Revelation chapter 12, the Jewish people are going to be scattered. And so the people that are going to live in Jerusalem and specifically are going to be utilizing the temple will not be people who want to honor God. And so the Jewish people, for all of the fact that they've missed out on the true Messiah, they still have a desire to honor Jehovah God, the ones that care about the temple at least, the religious Jews. But but the Gentiles that take over are not going to care about that. Okay, I spent way too much time on this, which means I'm going to have to cut some good stuff. So let's move forward. So God raises up servants. So in the second half of the tribulation, so in the first half we talked about the 144,000 and their purpose and how they're going to sort of be God's witnesses for the tribulation time period in leading the world to Christ. In the second half of the tribulation, so we're going to see sort of what happens to the people, the Jewish people, and in my belief, the 144,000 are going to be part of that, what happens to them in the first half. But God always leaves a representative. And we're going to see in a minute they're called witnesses. I believe that part of their ministry as witnesses, as the Old Testament teaches, if a crime takes place, everything has to be established with at least two witnesses. So one person can't just make up a lie and testify against somebody. And I think these two people are standing witnesses to the crimes of the Antichrist and his world and his government. And they are the witnesses that are standing before God in that sense. Now, they have other roles as well, and we're going to see that as we get there. But I think the reason why they're called witnesses is because they are going to be witnessing the evil of what's going to happen both tonight and, again, when we get to 12 and 13, we're going to see even more of this. We haven't really talked about the Antichrist a lot. We've talked a lot more about judgments. But as we start to shift tonight and in next week, and especially when we get to chapter 13, that we're going to see a lot more of what he's been up to while we've been looking at all these judgments. And so Revelation chapter 3. So I'm going to read through the entire part, this entire part, then I'm going to back up and go through it again. So don't panic if it looks like I'm jumping over stuff. So verse 3, and I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone would harm them, fire pours from their mouth and consumes their foes. If anyone would harm them, this is how he is doomed to be killed. They have the power to shut the sky, that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying. And they have the power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire. And when they have finished their testimony, the beast that rises from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that symbolically is called Sodom in Egypt, where the Lord was crucified. For 3.5 days, some from the peoples and tribes and languages and nations will gaze at their dead bodies and refuse to let them be placed in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and make merry and exchange presents, because these two prophets that have been a torment to those who dwell on the earth. But after 3.5 days, a breath of life from God enters them, and they stood up on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies watched them. So now you can sort of understand why I was so excited about teaching this passage. It's a very, very, very exciting passage from everything that's going on here. So let's back up and look at this. So first of all, who are the two witnesses, and what type of ministry did they have? So I talked a little bit about some of the ministry they might have. So let's go back through Revelation 3-6 again. And I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. So the 1,260 days, I believe, is the second half of the tribulation. To be fair, there are many great Bible teachers that believe that their ministry is during the first half of the tribulation. I believe that the connection between verse 2 and verse 3, where verse 2 talks about the temple being handed over to the Gentiles to trample the earth for 1,260 days, is connected to verse 3, where the two witnesses will prophesy for 1,260 days. Some people will put, almost everybody I know puts the trampling of the Gentiles in the second half of the tribulation after the abomination of desolation, because that's the only place that logically can happen. But some people will also take the witnesses, and put them in the first half, which to me doesn't make sense since they're connected to each other. Yes?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So on the King James Version, it states 1,203 square days.
So 3 score is 60.
60, okay.
Yeah, a score is 20. So when Abraham Lincoln said 4 score and 7 years ago, I think.
87 years ago.
Yeah, so that's just
It
an old
was
English
19
way of saying 20. So
Okay.
it's like a dozen.
It was
nowadays.
1863 when he gave the Gettysburg Address.
Okay, Mr. History
If you go
teacher.
back 87 years, it's 1777.
Thank you for clarifying.
No, that's fine. So I believe that the connection between verse 2 and verse 3 intentionally puts the witnesses in the second half of the tribulation. There's other reasons why I believe that, and we'll talk about them a little bit more when we get there. But I put all chapter 11 chronologically together. So I believe that this whole chapter is talking about the second half of the tribulation. But if you do run into people teaching, and as a matter of fact, if you've read the Left Behind books, they put the two witnesses in the first half of the tribulation. That's entirely possible. I won't write that off. I believe the context dictates them being in the second half, but it is entirely possible, but they're in the first half. Note the fact that they're dressed in sackcloth. So sackcloth is meant as a dress of mourning. In the Old Testament, you will see people who are mourning or repentant dressed in sackcloth, and I think it's representative of one of the things that the witnesses are going to be doing, which is mourning over the fact that God's temple is being desecrated. So this is interesting here. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. This is a callback to the book of Zechariah, chapter 4. And if we had enough time, we would go through that and talk about it. But basically, what Matt was just talking about, in the time of the rebuilding of the second temple, we had a similar passage where two men were called olive trees feeding a lampstand. And it was a representative of Zerubbabel, and the high priest. So Zerubbabel, we named him without telling you who he was. He was the he was the leader of the Jewish people when they went back to build the temple. And there was a high priest named Joshua, and they were the two witnesses, or the two olive trees at that time. And the symbolism is that. So oil, Matt's often talked about this. Oil represents in the Bible the Holy Spirit, and so it's the feeding of the lampstand as these olive trees. Olive trees produce olive oil, which was used by the Jewish people in their worship, and So the symbolism there is about feeding the lampstand that is representing standing before the world as the light of the world and stuff like that. I believe the symbolism here is meant to remind Jewish people and people that studied the Bible about the previous reference like this that calls back to Zerubbabel and to Joshua, but that this is two people that God has chosen to stand before the world as a representative in these dark times. So there's a lot more I could teach from there. Unfortunately, there's not enough time, and it doesn't really advance knowledge of the book of Revelation if we went into any more detail. I would just encourage you, if you're really interested in this, Zechariah chapter 4 is a really interesting read and talks about the time where the second temple was being rebuilt. Then skipping ahead to verse 5, I feel like we jumped. No, I didn't. And if anyone would harm them, fire pours from their mouth and consumes their foes. If anyone would harm them, this is how he is doomed to be killed. And so we see that just like the 144,000 witnesses, these two people are going to be sealed by God in the sense that they're going to be protected for their life of their ministry. So it's sort of a call out to us that sometimes we worry about what's going to happen to us and how we're going to survive and how awful this world is. Well, and it really is the fact of the matter is that God's put us here for a specific reason, and until we satisfy whatever it is He wants us to do, whatever He wants to do through us, we're divinely protected because He has plans for our lives, and there's nothing Satan or anybody else can do about it. And so in this case, they're actually given the power to protect themselves. And so if anybody tries to come after them, you can imagine in a second, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in Revelation chapter 13, but you can imagine people who oppose the Antichrist after the abomination of desolation, where he goes into the temple and sets himself up to be God and to be worshipped in place of God. You can imagine that after that, he's got these two people out in the courtyard of the temple, or maybe somewhere near the temple, because it doesn't actually say that they'll be in the temple. A lot of people suspect that that's where they're going to serve their ministry, but it doesn't actually say that. But wherever they're going to be telling the Antichrist what his ultimate fate is going to be, and that God is not blind, and they're going to be God's chosen representatives. And that's not going to please the Antichrist at all. And so obviously he's going to attempt to have them, taken care of. And if anyone would harm them, this is how they are doomed to die. Let's go to verse 6, and then I'm going to refer back to verse 5 in a bit. They also have the power to shut the sky that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying. And they have power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire. So note here, so we read ahead a little bit, and we saw the fact that the world hated these people so much so that when they were killed, it was a joy, celebration for them. And so obviously during the time period where the two witnesses are on the earth, they're going to be making the people of the world mad. And so defying the Antichrist could be one way that they're making them mad. But one of the later verses says that because they tormented the earth. And so what I personally believe is that those trumpet judgments we just took a look at, they're going to be, we saw from an earthly perspective that they were started via angels blowing trumpet. But I think from an earthly perspective, we're going to see the two witnesses taking credit for those judgments, and that they're going to be broadcasting that fact, that God is sending this judgment on you, turn back to Him. And I believe that they are going to be hated because of that. And so I believe that God's going to use them as the instrument for both the seal or the trumpet judgments and the bowl judgments. So now the question that everybody wants to know the answer to is, who are the two witnesses? Are they people that we know? What can we know about them? Well, the fact of the matter is that everything the Bible has to say about them, you've read. Because when we just read through the first 12 verses of Revelation 11. That's everything that's said about them. So, however, there are some clues in there that we can speculate. So going back to verse 5 a bit, oops, I went forward instead of backward. So it talks about fire pouring from a person's mouth and consuming them. So have we ever seen somebody in the Bible call down fire from heaven? Yes. So a lot of us know that the prophet Elijah did that multiple times. And he had the power of being able to call fire down from heaven. Also, the book of Malachi promises that Elijah the prophet will be sent back before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And so a lot of people speculate that one of these two witnesses is the prophet Elijah. I happen to agree with that. I believe that Elijah was promised. Elijah was at the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus, where he appeared with Jesus and Moses. And so I think there's the relationship there. And I believe that one of these two witnesses is Elijah, who, by the way, if we remember, he never actually died. He was carried off into heaven without dying. And so I think that suggests that Elijah could easily be one of these people. Now, the second one, so it's interesting. All of the early church fathers, if you read through the writings of the early church fathers, when they talk about these two witnesses, invariably they are referred to as Elijah and Enoch. So Enoch is a very interesting person because the Bible says very little about him. But if you were a student of the Jewish traditions at this time period, you would know a lot more than what the Bible actually says, because there was actually writings that were attributed to Enoch, and the Jewish people happened to know them very well. And the reason why I know that is because the brother of Jesus named Jude, who wrote the book of Jude, refers to some writings from the book of Enoch. And so I'm not here saying that the book of Enoch is inspired. So don't take that away from what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that these books existed, and the Jewish people at the time, the religious people at the time, were familiar with them, enough that they would quote them within our Bible. Now, for those of you who don't know anything about Enoch, there's not much to know except that he was a person he was the great-grandfather of Noah, who I think we all know. Yes, the great-grandfather of Noah. And he lived to be 365 years old. And the reason I remember that is because it's the exact number of days in a year. And then he was, the book of Genesis in chapter 5 says he walked with God and was not, because God took him. So it's similar to Elijah, that we have this character Enoch, who was also taken without dying. And so a lot of people believe, okay, well, since Elijah and Enoch didn't die, they need to come back down and die so that everybody in creation, or everybody that's ever existed, will have experienced death. Well, the fact of the matter that's not true, but that's a reason why a lot of people will suggest that this is Elijah and Enoch because of that. And Enoch in the book of Jude is actually referred to as a prophet. So some people believe that what's happening is the greatest prophet before the flood and the greatest prophet after the flood are being gathered at this last period of time to be prophets for God in the last days. And so those are common things. Now, for most of my life, I believed that this was Elijah and Enoch. I no longer believe that Enoch is the second witness, because I believe that it's much more clear that the second witness is actually Moses. And the reason why, there's a number of reasons why. One of the reasons why is when it talks about the power that the two witnesses have. In verse 5, it talked about the power that was traditionally ascribed to Elijah, which was calling down fire or producing fire to kill people. And in verse 6 here, we see the power to shut the sky that rain may not fall during the days of the prophesying. So we talked a little bit about that earlier. And that's another characteristic attributed to Elijah. In 1 Kings chapter 17, King Ahab was a very wicked king. And so Elijah said, there's going to be no rain until I say so. And he goes right before king and says that, then he takes off. And it did, sure enough, it didn't rain. And so he was a very hated person because the rain didn't just fall on the king, it fell on the entire kingdom. And so as the water dried up and stuff, people were not very happy with the prophet Elijah. But anyway, I can't take too many rabbit trails today. So Elijah also had that power. And then the power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire. So that second part certainly sounds like Moses, right? We all know about the 10. And actually, if you really think about it, Aaron was involved in some of those plagues too. But the reason why Moses is looked at here for several reasons. So first of all, we talked a little bit about the Mount of Transfiguration earlier. And if you remember, it was Elijah and Moses. So why am Moses and Elijah? Well, so Moses was was recognized by the Jewish people as the great lawgiver. And so there's very few people in Jewish history as revered as Moses. And then Elijah is considered the greatest of the prophets who lived. And so the symbolism here between the law and the prophets, that's how the Jewish people refer to the Old Testament, is the law and the prophets, because they combine all the prophets together into one section, the first 5 books of the Bible in the second section, the law and the prophets. So some people believe that that's a connection there. We see the Mount of Transfiguration again where they're meeting with Jesus, so there's that connection too. And then what tipped me over the edge to go with Moses over Enoch was, remember what I've been trying to emphasize, in some cases overemphasizing, which is the fact that the tribulation period is all about the Jewish people. So if the Jewish people were going to be, somebody was going to stand for them and to stand in their place, and also to stand as a continual witness to the few Jews that are left in Jerusalem after the abomination of desolation, it's going to be the two of the greatest people in the Jewish history. And so I believe that's why it's Moses and Elijah. I believe that they're going to be, they're the ones that they can't ignore them. So the problem that everybody has with Moses, and I got to do this really quick because so much more good stuff. Moses was, so Moses died, and so it's like, okay, does Moses have to come back and die again? So first of all, that's not fair, and second of all, so in any case, when we look at the book of Jude again, and we see that the archangel Michael and Satan had a dispute over the body of Moses. And this verse was dropped in there without a lot of context, and Jude was making a different point than what I'm trying to draw out of it here is. But for some reason, the body of Moses, there was a dispute between Satan and God as to what was going to happen with the body. And so the question is, well, why would that be? And second of all, why would it be revealed through the book of Jude to us today? And so again, I believe that's pointing to the fact that Moses' body was useful for something. It was going to be used again because God could have recreated it from the dust if he wanted to. But I do believe that that is another sign that points in the direction of Moses. I will say, for fairness, that there's a lot of different people that the two witnesses are attributed to. And a lot of people actually don't think that they're going to be anybody from history. They're actually just going to be two people that God raises up in this time period, and they're just going to be modern day prophets who stand and as a witness to God, and they're given some of the same powers as some of the Old Testament saints and prophets. So that's entirely possible. And quite frankly, it's hard to be dogmatic about any choice, because if God really wanted us to know, he would have told us. There was plenty of time to tell us Elijah and Moses or Enoch or whoever it was. And so I believe God left it intentionally vague. And so we've got to trust him that this is something that, while it's interesting to us, it's not something that we need to know. But we do, what is important for us to know is that God always leaves a witness to what he's going to do. He never leaves the earth without somebody who's standing in his place and telling people about his love and his justice. And so I believe that these are the two people for the second half of the tribulation. Okay, so then we're going to see the fate of these two witnesses. So evidently, as some of us have learned through our life, when you stand for God, it oftentimes doesn't always go well. And that's also one of the frustrations of being a Christian, is you feel like if you're doing the right thing for God, that God should, have things go well for you. And so when we face problems, it's like, well, God, I'm trying to do the right thing, and why are you keeping me from doing the right thing? Why are you putting barriers in my path and so forth? And in the case of the two witnesses, they were doing the right thing, but ultimately they paid a price for that. So as we looked at before, we'll look at again. And when they had finished their testimony, so that 1,260 days have wrapped up. So what this means in my perspective, from the timeline that I'm presenting to you guys, is I believe the 1,260 days is the second half of the tribulation. So when they have finished their testimony at the end of the 1,260 days, I believe we're very close to the second coming of Jesus. So I believe that we're skipping a lot of stuff here. We're jumping forward 3.5 years because that's what he's trying to teach us at this point. But I believe that at this point, when this stuff happens, that this is going to be at the end of the tribulation, right before Jesus comes back. Now, I'm not sure how soon before, but I think it's going to be right before. The beast that rises from the bottomless pit. So we talked about it a little bit about the bottomless pit last week. The Greek word is abyss. And the beast, if you recall back to Matt's excellent teaching earlier about the Antichrist, that's one of the Old Testament terms for the Antichrist. As a matter of fact, the term Antichrist never appears in the book of Revelation. Revelation always uses the term the beast, which is a reference back to Daniel. And so this is talking about the Antichrist. And again, when we get to Revelation 13, we'll look at more about what's happening during this time period. But the beast that rises from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them. So I don't believe that. So what this is saying is that there's going to be a struggle between the Antichrist and these two people who are continually, despite the fact that Antichrist is, for the most part, has most of the world worshiping him and obeying him in everything he says. There's always going to be this little thorn in his side with these two witnesses that are telling the Antichrist, the truth from God's perspective, and he's going to do everything he can to wipe them out, but ultimately he's not going to be successful till the very end. And at the very end, God will allow him to be successful, and he will finally have the ability to kill them. But that success is very short term. But before this, we notice here and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that symbolically is called Sodom and Egypt, where their Lord was crucified. So first of all, we note that once they're killed, their dead bodies are lying in the street. So it could be that they're not in the temple, but somewhere in a prominent place in Jerusalem. But they're in some place in Jerusalem that is very publicly accessible, and we'll see why that is in a little bit. And their dead bodies are going to be left in the street rather than taken care of, because the contempt that the people have for these two witnesses is so great that we're not going to even give them the dignity of a burial, but they're just going to let them lie and decay in the streets. And in the great city that symbolically is called Sodom and Egypt, where the Lord is crucified. So obviously this is Jerusalem. We all know where Jesus was crucified. So why symbolically Sodom and Egypt? Well, so Sodom is a reference to their corruption as the city at that time, where the world has become so corrupt that what happened in Abraham's day was the nation of Sodom and Gomorrah, or the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, were so corrupt that God had to send judgment on them and absolutely wipe them out because of where they were. And so the reference to Sodom is referring to a society and the holy city, the Jerusalem itself. The society is permeated to that point where even the holy city is no longer holy. It is the Gentiles are trampling over the city for 42 months, as we saw back in verse 2. And the city has become so corrupt that literally God, when he compares them to Sodom, he's basically saying, if I didn't have other plans, I would be forced by my own justice that I met out in the Old Testament to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to wipe out the city itself because of how evil it's become. Now, Egypt ties back to the bondage of the Jewish people. So whenever the nation of Israel traditionally thinks of Egypt, they remember their bondage for the time that they were in Egypt. And so in this sense, I think it's calling back to the spiritual bondage. Again, the fact that Jerusalem has become so corrupt that it's in such spiritual bondage that that it's become a place where even God. You notice how the word Jerusalem isn't used, and I think that's intentional, because the word Jerusalem means
City of peace.
city of peace. The city is no longer a city of peace. Right now, today, Jerusalem is hardly a city of peace. I mean, Matt can tell you about what he experienced, but there is all kinds of conflict and stuff going on over there. But even now, God referred to it as a city of peace because of what's going on. The city has become so corrupted that God will no longer use through the prophet or the apostle John, obviously, but the word Jerusalem is no longer used because in no way is it applicable any longer. It has become so corrupt that it is no longer a place where the city of peace is applicable to.
And I'll just add one thing to Egypt that I read, which is that Egypt was the source of the initial idolatry that invaded the nation. And so it's symbolic that the Jerusalem, or the place where the Lord was crucified here, is now so corrupt with idolatry, which honestly they had struggled with throughout their history, because they kept going back to the idols of Egypt, or the idols that were introduced from Egypt.
Right.
And so that could be like Sodom has to do with their unrighteous character and living out debauchery and the rest of it. And Egypt had to do with the symbolic nature of worshiping false gods or other gods.
And there will be a large portion of the Jewish citizenry that does worship the Antichrist. And so when the Antichrist sets up his false religion, and we'll see in Revelation chapter 13, there are going to be Jewish people that, just like as Matt was referring to throughout the Jewish history, they've constantly turned away from God towards false gods. And the ultimate expression of that will be when they worship the Antichrist in God's own temple. Melissa?
How come Gomorrah isn't mentioned very much in the Bible? Is it just kind of like it was along the same lines as Sodom?
I think that there's a lot of potential answers to that, but I do believe that Sodom is sort of a representative of what happened there. Actually, it wasn't just Sodom and Gomorrah, but there was, I think, actually 4 cities that were part of the judgment. So, I mean, even when we say Sodom and Gomorrah, we're not actually covering the complete judgment.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So we saw that. So we have the bodies laying in the streets for 3.5 days, and so for 3.5 days, some from the peoples and tribes and languages and nations will gaze at their dead bodies and refuse to let them be placed in a tomb. So we just talked about that a little bit. Note that the prophecy here about a time that's coming to the world where people from all peoples, tribes, languages, and nations will be able to view what's happening in Jerusalem, have that ability. And until the last 50 years or so, that's been a technology that hasn't existed. And so if you read through history commentary about Revelation chapter 11, they spiritualize this or something else, because they couldn't imagine a time where we would have the ability to see what's happening in any part of the world like we do now with the internet and so forth. So we do see that another thing that gives a lot of people encouragement that we might be getting closer to the end times is the fact that this technology does exist. But we do see that people from the entire earth, and it was noted by one of the persons that I was studying, that when the book of Revelation says peoples and tribes and languages and nations, that phrase is used to be another way of saying the entire earth. And so that's sort of a way to sort of put everybody, just another way of saying the entire world. And so we see this, that they haven't been buried and left in the tomb, and that those who dwelt on the earth will rejoice over them and make merry and exchange presents, because these 2 prophets had been a torment to those who dwelt on the earth. And so the second part there refers to what I was talking about earlier, where these people were seen as people who caused judgment to happen, and they were in the torment that was. And if you remember back to some of the trumpet judgments, we saw that one judgment where these creatures that John refers to as like locusts, and they had the ability to torment people but not kill them for 5 months. And so, and that people at that period wanted to die and were not allowed to die. So the pain from these judgments were so bad that people actually would rather have died than to live through the judgment. And so if it appears that a lot of those things were blamed on the two prophets. And so when you see somebody who's been causing you torment be killed, and people who have absolutely no godlessness left in them, the expression that they do is they basically have a special Christmas where presents are handed out because those people who that tormented them have now been killed. And so we see that we also see this, that ultimately God's plan is fulfilled. And so we see what I call a mini rapture event, when in reality I think I wrote that a little bit too prematurely. I think what we see more is like the ascension of Jesus more than anything else, as we see that it isn't much of a rapture in the sense that it's more of a resurrection and a ascension. But in any case, maybe I'm splitting hairs a little bit too much here. Verse 11, but after 3.5 days, a breath of life from God enters them, and they stood up on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. So you really, this would really be a good time to like play an actor's or a reenactment of this scene, because you just have to sit here and imagine all these people dancing around in the streets around these dead bodies, high-fiving each other, getting drunk, celebrating and everything like that. And then all of a sudden, there's these screams in the crowd, and as people are, straining to look and see what's going on, these lifeless bodies are suddenly, turning from, purple and yellow to, flesh color again, and they start to rise up and get up on their feet, and then you've got to imagine, what these people are thinking at that time. And it says obviously great fear fell on those who saw them. And then they heard a voice from heaven saying, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies watched them. So these people that they hated so much were resurrected, and then just right before their eyes, just drawn into heaven. And it really speaks to a number of things. First of all, it speaks to God using these two witnesses both in their life and their ministry and in their death and resurrection, that he has lessons that he was trying to teach the people that are that are still living on this earth at the time. And it goes back to what Matt and I have been talking about, which is God is a God of love, and he's always doing everything he can to bring people to him. That the Bible says that he doesn't want anybody to perish, but everybody to come to life. And so even with the resurrection of the witnesses, he's drawing people to him. And so I want to jump ahead to verse 13 here a little bit, and then I'll go back and set a context again.
So with the witnesses, we can kind of sum it up as when they come, it's repent, and then when they're resurrected, it's too late.
Well, not really, and that's why I skipped ahead to 13 real quick here. It talks about the earthquake, which we'll come back and talk to about. So it talks about some people who were killed, and the rest of them were terrified and gave glory to God in heaven. What I wanted to point out was that last part was, at the end of the day, everything that happens here is to draw people to repentance and to give glory to God. And nothing brings more glory to God than people who were faithfully stood and did their ministry. Something happened, and then God chose to resurrect them and use them even in their death and resurrection. So you asked a question I'm not prepared to answer at this point. So I'm going to ask you to hold on to it for a little bit. Because the reason why I'm not prepared to answer is because I do plan on talking about it. It's just not in this specific context. So this next part here is so we talked about the consequences of this. So at this hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. Oh good, I did put it in there. So I believe, as I told you, I believe that the witnesses, their death and resurrection at the very end of the tribulation. So interestingly enough, another thing that I believe is at the very end of the tribulation is the bowl judgments. And so I'm going to skip ahead to something we're going to come back to in several weeks. And this is the seventh bowl judgment. The seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." And there were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a great earthquake such as there's never been since man was on earth. So great was that earthquake. This great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And God remembered Babylon the Great to make her drain the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath. So we're not going to get into everything in these verses because we're going to come back to these verses later. The thing I want to point out, the fact is, there was an earthquake, great earthquake during the 7th seal judgment, or the 7th bowl judgment, excuse me, and that the great city, Jerusalem, was split into 3 parts. I believe that this earthquake is the earthquake referred to in Revelation. Oops, I probably shouldn't go backwards. Well, I believe that's the earthquake that's referred to here. So I believe that we're seeing some overlap in some of the passages of Scripture that we're going to be talking about. And it won't be the last time, in my opinion, that we see overlap here. But I do believe that this is that earthquake, and that we are again, from a timeline standpoint, I believe that this is happening right at the very end of the tribulation, just before Jesus is coming back. And here's another reason why I believe that. Because the 7th trumpet is about to sound. Now, in my timeline, I believe the 7th trumpet happens weeks or maybe even days before the return of Jesus Christ. And I will back that up as we go along. But I believe the connection here, because I do want to be fair. A lot of people, there's a lot of, as a matter of fact, one of the guys I sort of look to the most believes that the witnesses are in the first half of the tribulation, and that the 7 trumpets are also in the first half of the tribulation. And so there is a valid.
Would you say he believes that all 7 are in the first half, or 6 of the 7? Because isn't the 7th trump ultimately the unveiling?
Well, so yes, so we're not going to actually see the. So it's interesting. We're told the 7th trump sounds, but we don't actually see the 7th trumpet necessarily. I don't believe the earthquake is the 7th trumpet judgment. So we'll get there in a minute. But I do want to say that I just want to be fair to the fact that there are teachers that teach that both of this is in the first half of the tribulation. But to me, that what ties it into the second half of the tribulation, from my point of view, is Revelation 11, verse 2, where it talks about the city of Jerusalem being trampled for 42 months, and then immediately talks about the 2 witnesses also having a ministry for 42 months. To me, that's connecting those two in the same timeline. And the trampling of the nation of Jerusalem, or the city of Jerusalem, is definitely in the second half of the tribulation. So I'm just throwing that out there for those of you who care a lot about the timeline. That's how I'm getting there. Some of you may not care about the timeline, in which case that's fine. I will say this. While the reason why I think the timeline is important is because when I'm reading a story, I like to know when things are happening, to sort of in my brain put events together that may not be logically connected. And I think so it helps me to understand when I'm reading more. But the fact of the matter is the timeline portion of my little presentation that I throw up there every week is not inspired in any way. It is one person's opinion of what it looks like. And that if God wanted us to know the complete timeline, he would have been a lot more specific when he revealed things. And so I in no way trying to be dogmatic. Again, as I said at the beginning, this is all in my opinion. So that's,
What are the odds that you're
1% probably.
right? So 100 to 1.
But until God convicts me differently, I'm going to teach the way he's sort of convicted me. And then that's really not fair, because now I'm taking my pure personal view and ascribing it to God giving it to me. So I don't want to become like John or the Mormon guy, Joseph Smith, where I've been given a revelation from God or
As long
anything.
as you don't pull out any glasses.
No. Okay, so let's real quick look at the 7th trumpet judgment. So in verse 14, so it talks about the second woe has passed. So remember, now we're going back to Revelation chapter 9, and that was actually last week. So where we talked about
200 million.
yeah.
Second one.
So the fifth. So after the 4th trumpet judgment, there was an angel that came and said, "Woe, woe, woe, for the inhabitants of the earth for the next 3 trumpet judgments. And then we saw the 5th trumpet judgment and the 6th trumpet judgment last week. And the 5th trumpet judgment was the first woe. The 6th trumpet judgment was
That
the
like
second
the
woe.
demon, whatever they're called, demon.
Well, there was an army of 200 million people.
Well, the 5th
and-
trumpet was the demon.
Yeah, the demon locusts.
Locust, yeah.
So, but the important thing is this is sort of tying, now we're connecting back up. So at the end of chapter 9, we sort of moved away from the scene of what we were talking about for a bit, in Revelation chapter 10, and even Revelation chapter 11. Now we're sort of coming back and connecting back again. So this is sort of connecting us back to what we were studying at the end of Revelation 9, which is that the second woe is past at the 6th trumpet judgment. Behold, the 3rd woe is soon to come, which means the 7th trumpet judgment. And the angel who I saw standing on the sea and on the land, so the angel that Matt was talking about last week, raised his right hand to heaven. Oh, wait a second. The reason why this is familiar is because Matt talked about this last week. So this angel, and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created the earth and what is in it, and the earth and the heaven and what is in it, the earth was in it, the seas what is in it, that there would be no more delay, but that in the days of the 7th trumpet, the days of the trumpet call to be sounded by the 7th angel, the mystery of God would be fulfilled, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. So we looked at this last week, and now we're actually going to see the 7th judgment, or the 7th trumpet judgment happen. So I was telling Kathleen earlier that my brain gets ahead of my mouth, and so that's why I stumble through things. I got to think about what I'm saying, not what I'm about to say. So Revelation 11, verse 15, then the 7th angel blew his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, his Messiah, and he shall reign forever and ever. So I believe that at this point, this is announcing the second coming of Jesus. I believe that the 7th trumpet is the announcement of the second coming of Jesus. Now, if that's true, then how can some people believe that the trumpet judgments are in the first half of the Revelation, or the first half of the tribulation? The answer to that is some people believe that this is where God begins his taking back the world from Satan. So I don't think I put him in there. Oh, I did. Oh, okay. Boy, I was a lot more optimistic about my time. So I want to show you some verses that talk about who's in charge of this world right now, because I think as Christians, we hear a lot about kingdom now, and that God's reigning on earth right now and is king of heaven, or of king of the earth right now. So I'm going to give you some verses that I want you to ponder over. So first one is from Luke chapter 4, and this is when the devil was tempting Jesus, when Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days and really, really hungry. Then the devil took him, Jesus, up to show him all of the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time, and said to him, to you I will give this authority and their glory, for it has been delivered to me, and I will give it to whoever I will. In other words, the authority of the kingdoms of this world has been given to me, and if you worship me, I will give it to you. And I didn't record the response. Matt and I have talked about this, and Matt doesn't really...
But this is pre-death and resurrection of Jesus.
Yes.
And then in Matthew 28...
Okay, I don't need you to be counter-teaching me.
I know, but in Matthew 28, he says, all authority on heaven and earth is mine.
Yes. So how do you... Okay, so if he had all... So this is what we do in his office. If he had all authority in Matthew chapter 28, why is he just in the 7th trumpet, is he actually claiming
I'm
it?
just telling you what the Bible says. I
Okay,
don't know.
well, I'm going to show you what the Bible also says.
There you go.
So in 2 Corinthians 4, chapter 4, verse 4, it says, in their case, the God of this world has blinded the mind of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel and of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. So who is the God of this world? It's certainly not Jesus, because he would not be blinding the minds of the unbelievers. So obviously we're talking about Satan here.
Yes.
And also in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, it says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly place. Again, this is talking about The authorities that exist on this earth are the evil authorities that we're wrestling against. We're not wrestling against good authorities, so we're wrestling. So I will say this. Here's where Matt and I come back on the same page. I am not here saying that God has ceded over authority over the earth to Satan and that Satan has complete ability to do anything he wants here. God is obviously sovereign. He is reigning from heaven, and there is no, I don't want anybody to leave this room without thinking that that is absolutely true. I also believe that he has, for a time, given the ability to do some things in this world and to act in this world in such a way that it's a hindrance to us as Christians, and that he is given more latitude than normal, but that is going to end at some point. And I believe that the seal, going back to Revelation chapter 6, and Matt pointed this out very, very eloquently. Back in those days, a scroll with 7 seals was done for a last will and testament. And back in the days of the book of Revelation was written, that was the kind of scroll that got 7 seals, was a last will and testament. And if that last will and testament was Jesus's inheritance of the world, not that he didn't already have it as God, but from the earthly standpoint as well, he's taking it back from Satan, who stole it from Adam and Eve when they sinned, and God's taking it back, and it's going to be his from this point forward. He's no longer going to allow Satan to have his due. And Matt's going to talk in 2 weeks. He's going to talk a little bit more about how Satan is going to start to be limited during this time frame. And Matt's going to be able to present from his standpoint why the red trumpet judgment's in the middle point of the tribulation, because it has to do a lot about something that happens to Satan at the midpoint of the tribulation. I don't want to spoil too much of the great things he's going to teach, but I will encourage you to come back in 2 weeks, because it's the Revelation chapter 12 is an awesome story. Yes.
Just to pinpoint on how we were talking about the 2 witnesses, to say if, like, they were just these random people or whatever.
Some people believe that, yes.
Yeah, so just picking my brain. So if they were just these 2 random people, and of course, we're called to be the witnesses of God and what he's done in our lives and everything. So when he's giving us the authority, which he's speaking in the Bible, we are called to just, rebuke things or whatever this power that we're given. It kind of represents when he's talking about, we're able to, like, this fire and all this other stuff. So it just, I don't know, it kind of pinpoints back to what I'm thinking about, like, if it were to be kind of pretty much anybody, because we are given that authority from God,
right? Because
we're called to go and speak his goodness and what we're supposed to be sharing to the other people who don't believe or are just unsure, and then also just hitting on the part where they died. It kind of just ringed my mind about how when we die, come to the time, we're going to be going back to Jesus.
Right,
so we're going to go ahead and
our
live
resurrection.
This new resurrection, kind of like symbolizes when Jesus died, we'll be doing the same thing pretty much. And it kind of gives us that idea of that when that does happen, that gives, like they said, that it's going to give an opportunity for other people to, be able to call to him, because they're just lost souls, lost people who have no idea about, the real goodness of what God can do. We have these people who are trying to tell, this is what God's doing, this is my testimony, but it's like, it doesn't really click into somebody when you have to actually see somebody, like, you can't even comprehend it in your mind and be like, wow, we just celebrated them being dead, and we're celebrating, I guess, Satan or whatever, and they're coming back to life because God's actually real. Like, wow, he really did that. He just blew their breath and there you go.
Yeah. Then build a little bit. So I like what you said. To build a little bit more on that, one of the ideas for who the two witnesses are for people who take the book of Revelations non-literally is people see the 2 witnesses as the church. And so they're the people that stand in for God at this time frame. And so when you spiritualize the book of Revelation, that you can come to that interpretation that the 2 witnesses might actually be the church. The reason why I reject that is because I don't like spiritualizing things unnecessarily. I believe that when God symbolically refers to people, he will draw the tell you what the symbol points to. For example, remember in verse 8 when we looked at the city of Jerusalem, which was symbolically called Sodom and Egypt. Well, it immediately tells us afterwards it said the city where Jesus was crucified. So we could identify that symbol. And so I don't believe that it symbolically represents the church, but I do.
It just could make sense. I'm just saying.
I will acknowledge the fact that there is a parallel there between what the church is called to and what the two witnesses are going to be called to.
Yeah.
It points out, again, the fact that I believe that God in every situation has a witness for him, whether it's the church now, whether it's the tribulation saints through the 144,000 witnesses, or in the case of the two witnesses themselves. God will always have somebody on earth testifying to the truth until the point where Jesus comes and is physically down here, in which case we no longer need the representatives because we'll have the actual people here.
Right.
Let me zoom really quick here. Okay, so I was still making the point.
That's your conclusion of Revelation 11.
Okay, you're right. And the 24 elders who sat on their throne. Okay, so the seven. I don't have it. Let me reset the scene. So the seventh trumpet sounds, and here's what happens. And so what's going to happen? Seventh trumpet sounds. There's going to be this great judgment, right? Because we're expecting it. Well, so what happens instead is that the 24 elders who sit on their thrones, and we talked about them in Revelation chapter 4, they sit on the thrones before God, fell on their face and worshiped God, saying, "We give thanks to you, Lord God Almighty, who is and who was, for you have taken your great power and begun to reign. The nations raged, but your wrath came, and the time for the dead to be judged, and for rewarding your servants, the prophets and saints, and those who fear your name, both small and great, and for destroying the destroyers of the earth." And so at the time of the seventh trumpet judgment, here's what I see happening, is that the 24 elders, who I believe represent the church, but in any case, whoever they are, they'll be up in heaven praising God that it's time for the dead to be judged, the rewarding of your servants, the prophets and saints, and for those who fear your name, both small and great, and for destroying the destroyers of the earth. I believe this is all talking about the second coming. So in my mind, again, the seventh trumpet happens and the second coming happens. And so you're going to sit there and say, well, wait a second. How can the seventh trumpet happen and then the second coming of Jesus? Don't we have some bold judgments in there? So that's the mystery I'm going to leave to you. I'm not going to show all my cards right now. But my hope to get you back for the second session of this summer is that I believe that those both can be true. And so how I will leave to it till we get to the seven seal judgments themselves. Although I will give spoilers all through Revelation 13 as well. Then God's temple in heaven. So now we started this chapter looking at the earthly temple, and now we're suddenly drawn attention to the fact that there is a temple in heaven. And somebody pointed out that it was that the earthly temple is a representative of God's temple in heaven. And so the temple in heaven was open, and the Ark of the Covenant, so Raiders of the Lost Ark, anybody who, Indiana Jones, was seen within his temple. So now I don't believe that's the earthly Ark of the Covenant. But and as a matter of fact, we'll see in Revelation chapter 13 that the earthly Ark of the Covenant, or at least a replacement for it, will be sitting in the third temple. But God's Ark of the Covenant was seen within his temple. There were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and heavy hail. What I want to point out about this verse is we always see when something really great happens. We saw it in Revelation 4, and we saw it during some of the seal judgments, I believe, and some of the trumpet judgments. There's always lightning, rumbling, peals of thunder, and earthquake, and this time also heavy hail. I think some of this... I don't have enough time. We're going to come back to what the full consequences of the seventh trumpet. I'm going to leave a sort of a cliffhanger here. But there is more to the seventh trumpet judgment. And I talked about this before. Quite frankly, wouldn't blame you if you don't remember it. But if you happen to remember what we talked about and how the seal judgments and the trumpet judgments and the bowl judgments are connected to one another, you might understand how the seventh trumpet can have earthquake, hail, because they might be connected to the bowl judgments. And so with that as sort of a cliffhanger, we're going to leave off there. I hate to leave you guys on a cliffhanger, but I do want you to come back. We do have a lot more. We're only halfway through the book of Revelation, and we skipped the first 3 chapters. So we've got a lot more to go. And so what we're going to have to do in the second session is we're going to have to actually double up on some nights. We're going to cover 2 chapters just because we've got so much left to cover. The good news is that the second half of the book of Revelation is a lot more topical than the first half. And so I think we can teach more from a covering several verses at once rather than necessarily having to go and dig through each verse by verse to dig out all of the kernels of stuff. So I'm really looking forward to it. The second half of the tribulation, or the book of Revelations rather, is where all the good stuff happens. And so come back and we've had a lot of the bad stuff in the first half. So come back for the good stuff. And that starts as soon as next week, because Revelation chapter 12 should be 2 weeks. Yes, thank you. Revelation chapter 12 is a very encouraging passage from seeing our Savior Jesus Christ and about God's plan for the very beginning, all the way to the end of the earth. So I have maybe a couple minutes for questions. Kathleen, I saw your hand first.
Who were the dead to be judged in verse 18?
I believe that's referring to the great white throne judgment. So we will see that when we get into Revelation chapter 19, 20, somewhere around there. 19. Any other quick questions? That I know I can turn a quick question into a long answer. So always feel free to ask us questions when you see us around. So when you see us next week at the picnic, you have full license to come up and ask us questions. I hope to see you guys all there. It is an opportunity for us to be able to bring people who might be interested in church but don't want to come on a Sunday morning to things or wouldn't feel comfortable. It is an opportunity to see people expressing the love of Jesus for free and without having any obligation to do anything else.
And I'd say, like, if you see people that are newer and they're not in a class, it's a good opportunity to invite them back for Revelation 12, because it's basically a great chapter to begin the second half with.
Yes.
Because the first 5 verses recaps kind of the grand story of the Bible.
Yeah.
And so we're going to go all the way back to Genesis 3, and we're going to look through some events that transpired, that God began the redemptive story of what he was going to accomplish through Christ. And so I think for anybody, it's going to okay, well, I'm not totally lost coming into this Revelation class if they jump in.
As a matter of fact, Matt and I, when we laid out the whole series, we purposely chose Revelation chapter 12 as that first session of the second section, because we that fact, it's such a great jumping on period for people. So that was intentional. So anyway, next week we'll see you at the park. 2 weeks from now, we'll see you back here. Let me close in a quick word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for your word and for your love to reveal this stuff to us, Lord. We don't understand everything, but we trust you that you're a great God who loves us and is working towards the betterment of where the world is going. And we pray that you'll reveal all this to us through the second half of Revelation. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.